Jesus. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them, Jesus addressed this parable. A man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me." So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat, but here I am dying from hunger. I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers.' So he got up, went back to his father while he was still a long way off. His father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. And his son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But his father ordered his servants quickly, 'Bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast. Because his son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' Then the celebration began. Now the older son had been out in the field, and on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what this might mean. The servant said to him, 'Your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' He became angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out and pleaded with him. He said to his father in reply, 'Look, all these years I have served you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat to feast on with you and my friends. But when your son returns, who swallowed up the property with prostitutes, for him you slaughter the fattened calf.' He said to him, 'My son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. This is one of my favorite texts in all of the Scriptures. And it was certainly played out with us on Sunday evening when God was here. When I walked away and was found again. When the loving embrace of God captured my soul again. This text in the Lenten season is a very important one. It is one that captures our imagination about, first of all, family relationships. But it also captures our imagination with the very first sentence of the text that Jesus was being battered around because he was drawing near to sinners. He was accused of, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Imagine that. Imagine that every time we come to the Eucharist, all those sinners in this house are here with us. He eats with them and captures their imagination and opens his heart to everybody. So the parable was actually for the tax collectors, and it says, and sinners. They were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. Some years ago, I was in a poetry class it was about poetry and preaching. And one of the things that we dove into with this text was about one of the characters who was not there in the words of the text. But the mother. What about the mother? Don't you wonder how she maneuvered this whole thing? You could just see her in her little shack peeling potatoes and waiting as her husband ran down the driveway road to greet the son. And what was going on in her heart and imagination that she had to wait for all of this to unfold. She was very much, I'm sure, like Mary, who waited for Jesus in so many different situations, but you could just feel the mother's heartbeat in this, of her anxiousness and her confusion about what was going to happen. After all, those two sons were also hers. And they had also left her with the younger son with the inheritance that was also going to keep her. So off that young son went and found himself finally in his voice after he had spent all the money. And then he was with the swine. Now imagine a Jew being with the swine. He finally came to his senses, just like I did on Sunday night when I was beating my hand against the wall. And finally came back to the Father's embrace. And you can just see the mother peering behind a drape by her kitchen window, watching all of that happen, right? Anyway, there was in that class a lot of poetry written about the mother and about the mother's waiting for the return of the younger son, but also the mother too, who had also seen through the anger and the tenseness of the older son who stayed there. She's also the one who had to deal with him, right? And you could just see those long night conversations at a kitchen table with that older son, the mother having, trying to calm him down about his father and his brother. This text involves a lot of characters that aren't in the story, and particularly the mother who I would love to have you reflect on. But the text itself involves an invitation from Jesus to run toward him, and an invitation from Jesus to bring with us all that seems despairing in us, and all that seems to be unreconciled in him, and all that seems to be unresolved in a relationship before we ultimately run down the path to heaven. There's a lot going on in this text, and I invite you again to reflect on those questions that I gave you and offered you in that booklet, because it speaks to us in many, many different ways about what our sin is, where do we go with it, our disappointments and failures, where do we go with them, how do we release them, how do we have an openness to God so God may celebrate us as well. God celebrates us. It may not be with a fattened calf here in the house, but God celebrates when our heart finally finds him over and over and over again. I think it's important to realize that this invitation is for us all the time. So our hearts don't go to him just one time. Our hearts don't go back to God just one time, but over and over and over again. And also for things that rise up within us that disturb us, even from our past, even from all the things that we thought we had resolved in our lives. When those things come to surface in us, where do we go with that stuff? Does it just make us more and more angry? Or can we find our way back to the Father's love for us in the gift of his Son, Jesus? In the course of my ministry, I've learned an awful lot from the people that I've hung out with. And as I've mentioned to you, and they have all taught me how to be reconciled with God. They've all taught me how to let go of the things that ensnare me and keep me from decent relationships and decent words to come out of my mouth. Some years ago, I was in the back of the church, and I had a broom in my hand, and I was sweeping around because it was confession time on a Saturday afternoon. And, I didn't have much business. So I was sweeping around, cleaning up things, and, straightening up the pews and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, this woman came in. She had a look of terror on her face. And so I made my way back to the confessional. She carried with her a bunch of bags. Now, why in the world she had to have about 5 shopping bags, a purse and a satchel and all kinds of other stuff in her hands, I have no idea. But she brought them all in. And as she sat down, I realized from the get-go that was her way of protecting herself from what she was about to say. So I sat there. I knew something was coming. And sure enough, She says, Father, I really have to go to confession today because on Monday, the doctors are going to take my voice box, and I will never again have an opportunity to speak what's in my heart and to speak what I need to speak so that God will forgive me. I will never again have an opportunity to hear my own voice say even my sins. And I need to do something today because this is the end. No wonder she had all the bags and the satchels and purses and shopping bags surrounding her. She began. And part of the things that she said, I won't say all of that, obviously, but she said basically, I never wanted the life that I had. I never wanted to marry the guy that I married. I never wanted to have the kids that I had. I never even wanted the career that I had. And she went on from there. All I could do was to hold her intentions lightly in God and listen to the sound of her voice for the last time. She was so incredibly beautiful. And the more she spoke, the deeper the hole got with all of the disappointments and the things that she needed to get out of her voice for the last time. And I just sat there in absolute awe. About a month later, first of all, I had never seen this woman before, never. And about a month later, she came back and I saw her coming in the door of the church before a Saturday evening mass. And because I was in the aisle and I turned around and looked and she looked at me and she mouthed, "Thank you." And I had never seen her again since. My sisters, it's really important for us in this Lenten season to look at the things that we need to get off of our chest, and maybe for the last time. Maybe we need to still, as it rises up within us, those disappointments from childhood, the relationships that have formed us in a negative way, I don't know, do those things need to be voiced in you? Do you need to hear the sound of your voice again, asking for God's love and mercy? Can you do that in the dark of night, surrounded by all of your purses and bags and satchels? Can you do that in the confines of your room or with another sister or somewhere? Maybe it might be healthy for you to articulate some of those things before Jesus takes your breath away. It's an invitation that this gospel offers us, And it's an invitation that the Lenten season offers us, because what we are involved in is trying to make sure that all of the darkness in our hearts is released so we can see the bright promise of God within us, calling us into Easter and beyond. God captures us, and it's not a one-shot deal. We have to come back over and over again to the source because we forget. We forget that we're loved. And we forget that we're part of the plan of God on this earth and the mystery of the church. And we think any good thing that has happened to us happened in the past. And I'm not going to let you just stay there. I don't want you to stay there. Because there is no grace living in the past, and there is no grace living in the future. Why? Because both of those things don't exist. The only thing that exists is living today, in this moment. And that's where we'll find a prodigal father running down the road to chase us and to welcome us. Another person that I really learned what the Lenten season was about was a man named Michael, who died in 1986. He was a young kid. We were the same age, and so we were 26 or so. I was in Colorado Springs, and I got a phone call one day from the head of the Notre Dame alumni group in Colorado Springs. Now, I had never even had a conversation with this guy before, and he said, I need you to go to the hospital because there's a young man dying of bone cancer. He needs to speak to a priest. However, he hates priests, and especially Holy Cross priests. And he said he went to the University of Notre Dame and has never spoken to a Holy Cross priest since. But the guy says, I think you should go. I go, okay. So I was going to wait till the next morning to go, but instead I went that evening after dinner. So I find the room, he had visitors, and so I kind of just stayed by the door until the visitors left. Now, on the other side of his bed was his father, tall, strong man. You could tell that that father had been standing with him for these past couple of years through this incredible experience of cancer. So I walk in, and I had just a sport shirt on and a sport coat because I didn't want to force that Holy Cross priest thing on him. So I introduced myself. He looks at me and says, do you know why I've not been to church since college? And I said, no. And he said, because of you Holy Cross priests. And I said, oh, okay. And he threw out a couple of other things, and he waited for my response, and I said, oh, okay. And I just stood there. That was it. I left. So the following day, I get a phone call, and this guy that originally called me said, "You've got to get back there to that hospital because you have no idea what you've done." And I go, "Now what did a Holy Cross priest do?" So I walked back. I went back to the hospital, walked into this room. His father was standing in the exact same place he had been standing the night before. And he was watching TV, and I just stood there. And I stood there. And I stood there. Finally, he flips off the clicker of the TV. He looks at me and he says, "Would you anoint me?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Would you do my funeral?" I said, "Yes." So his father, from the other side of the bed, put his hip on that side of the bed. And I came over and put my right hip on his bed. And I reached over and took his tears with my thumb. And I anointed him with the sign of salvation. And all three of us just wept. The next day, he went home to die. At 26, he was a lawyer. And his wife was also a lawyer. She was 26. And they also had, Michael had a best friend, Brian, and his wife, and both of them were lawyers. So his wife wasn't there either one of those times, and so I had not met her yet. So he asked me if I would go to his home. So a couple days later, I went to his home. He had already decreased considerably from when I first met him. He looked at me and he said, "Father, would you hold my hand?" And I said, "Yes." But he said, "Father, don't let go." So I stood there, prayed with him, held his hand for a long time. And eventually, of course, I had to go home. Well, the interesting thing was, in Colorado Springs, there's this place called the Cave of the Winds. And it's up on a mountain just outside the city. And it's a place where, I don't know where they got all kinds of stuff up there. So his best friend, Brian, and his wife were that following weekend, were at the Cave of the Winds. And before getting into their car in this parking lot up in this mountain, they went to the car, and as he was opening the car door, the ground gave way, and Brian fell to his death. So Michael, of course, was devastated. His best friend, who was supposed to help with this whole process with his wife, and was gone. Michael died the next day. So at his funeral, I went to the door of the church to greet the family and the body. And I had on this white chasuble and the white pall that surrounded the casket. And I realized that those garments are the same thing. That his dying helped me to live, and my life helped him die. When he asked me to anoint him and do his funeral, he said to me, I want you to do it because I can tell you believe it. And what he didn't understand at the moment was, I didn't know if I believed it or not. At that door of the church, my heart opened so wide, realizing that his death was helping me to live. My life helped him to die. I couldn't ask for anything more powerful than that. So behind the casket, coming into the church, of course, were two widows, both at 26 years old, who came in and sat in the first pew, and every lawyer in town was there. You've never seen so many suits. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. When I told the story about him coming back and reconciling with the Father, and his heart being open to the reality that his death was going to be okay. I learned so much from him about how to say, I'm sorry, about how to take stock of my relationships, about how not to take for granted the gift of Jesus' presence and loving embrace for me and for us. It was all in the dying process of a young Notre Dame grad lawyer at 26, dying of bone cancer. And it was an unbelievable mystery. All of us have had people in our lives who teach us how to believe and who teach us about how to run back to God when we are most desperate and lonely and insecure, when our hearts feel dark, when despairing seems more overwhelming than the hope of God, when the darkness of night seems so incredibly lonely, and we feel so lost in the life that we have professed. There are many people who teach us how to run back to the Father's love. There are many people who teach us about how to gear our hearts again into the direction of God's loving hope for our lives. And I wonder if you can sit with those people tonight who have taught you how to love and how to be loved and how to chase down the Father's love for you and how to open your heart again to the promise of Jesus' love for you, I want you to run toward them in your sleep and in your room or under your bed or wherever you keep the memories of those people. In this Lenten season, be open-hearted toward your whole life. To not to be is a real diminishment for us. We have to be open-hearted towards every single thing that has happened to us, because nothing that has happened to us will ultimately keep us from the loving embrace that God has for us. I have learned most of the stuff that I've learned from my own prayer, and I've learned from being in relationship with people and my experiences. I don't learn very well from books, but I do learn from stepping into the unknown in a confessional or in a hospital room and inviting people to tell me the truth of their lives. Because what I learn is how to tell the truth of my own. Life is such a fascinating project, and it is incredibly complicated. And I hope that all of us in this Lenten season and even in this time of retreat can reflect a bit about how we get stuck on the road to freedom, about how we get stuck and afraid on the road to God's embracing us. We don't need to bring with us all of our gear, all of our bags and satchels and purses and belongings to come before God. In fact, it's so much better if we leave all that stuff home. But what we do need to do every now and again is to sit with Jesus so he can hear the sound of our voice. Because someday, he will take our breath away. And our voices will be silent too. In this great, incredible passage from Luke's Gospel of the prodigal son, may we find our way home together in the church and in our world. And may all of you under this roof find your way home beautifully among the congregation of the Sisters of St. Agnes. Because you are one, and you are beloved, and you are his. Run safely home. God give you peace.